Hello and welcome to another episode of the Entity Framework Community Standup. I'm Jeremy Likness. I'm a program manager for dotnet Data, and we have quite the crew with us today. We have Shai on the Entity Framework team.
Hey, everybody.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. We have Eric, who is our new community co-host. Eric, welcome.
Thanks a lot.
We have, I'll get to Arthur in a second. I want to introduce our guest, Jonathan, who's going to be presenting his project to us today. Jonathan.
Hi, everybody.
And then we have Arthur, who is head of the EF Core team and also going to give us the state of the unicorn.
Right. So let's get started with that. Our little overview of where things are right now in the world of Entity Framework and data in general. As we talked about, the plan for out there. We have a link to a blog post about it.
Arthur, I'm hearing some bad audio. I don't know if something happened with the.
Okay.
There we go. That's much better.
Okay. So the plan for EF 4.6.0 is out there. We talked about it last week. When we show the links, we'll show a link to the blog post about it. We've got some great feedback on that, but we're always looking for more. Right now, we're preparing for the mid-February preview one of EF 4.6.0. So we're starting the preview one build now. So basically, anything that's currently checked in, which I'll go into in a second, is going to be in preview one in mid-February. Anything that goes in after this, the next data, people saying it's still understand. So is the audio good for you guys? Okay, I'll keep going since nobody's saying anything.
Oh well, yeah, you're breaking up still a little bit. Not sure why. It was clear earlier.
I don't know what to do about it. Maybe I can
close off the.
There we go.
That's much better.
That's super clear. Whatever you did right there.
I didn't do anything. I was just looking.
Okay. All right. It was a temporary clog in the internet pipeline.
Okay. So where was I? Oh yes, preview one. So we're preparing the builds for preview one now. Anything that is checked in before yesterday, I think, is going to be in preview 1. Stuff that's checked in after that will not be in preview 1. And this is basically because we have to spin all the wheels to do the build of all of .NET Core 6.0, basically, not just EF Core. And that whole process, we have a bunch of time built in to make sure that we do it right, and we can validate that for preview 1. So that's why we kind of closed down a little bit early. Of course, you can always get the daily builds if you want the most up to date. So in preview 1, we have 63 enhancements and 32 bugs fixed already. There's a few other cleanup and docs issues there as well. In these 16 of these are community contributions, and I'll show you the full list of those in a second. So while the EF team has been working primarily on cleanup and code quality and documentation, all that, we've still had community contributors adding some really good stuff. Some of the things that people seem to do well contributing, overloads for things that we translate or don't translate, BCL methods. So for example, we weren't translating some string concat overloads, and we had a community PR that did that. That's a relatively self-contained thing that people can do. It's in the query pipeline, so it's not necessarily super easy, but it's usually doable. Another thing that a lot of people do is the entity is mapping attributes, so data annotations, if you will. So we now have, for example, entity type configuration attribute. So you can put this on your entity type, and then whenever it's included in the model, it'll go grab the entity type configuration type automatically from the annotated type. Likewise, we've got Unicode attribute from the community. So this is going to be used usually on SQL Server to suppress Unicode. So to use varchar instead of nvarchar, for example. And a precision attribute. So now you can do precision and scale, for example, on decimals in an attribute without having to explicitly specify the underlying database type. So all those attributes, those are good things for people to work on as contributions. They're fairly self-contained and they follow a normal, regular pattern. Also, we've had a few people do things in the in-memory database. So, for example, we had a community contribution. I should have put the people who contributed these things on the slide. I will do that next time. So we had one that basically validates that if you try and save null into a required column, then the in-memory database won't allow that. That currently was never validated by the in-memory database. There's an option to switch that off if it breaks all your tests because you weren't checking that. But by default, now the in-memory database is validating for you. Let me quickly switch over to GitHub here. So if you want to see all the things that are fixed in a particular release, then we can go to, this is just GitHub, and then issues. And then in here, I can choose a milestone. So for example, I can choose the 6.0 preview 1 milestone. That shows there's nothing open, but in the closed, that shows all of the things that we fixed. So if you want more detail, go there. Likewise, you can filter by these labels. So we have the enhancement label, which is enhancements, and the bug label, which is bugs. And then we also have started doing this now for EF Core 6. We have a community contribution. So down here, this is the full list of bugs that have been fixed and enhancements that have been implemented by the community. So go look at those for ideas as well. Plus, this doesn't list any of the contributions to docs, where it's usually fairly straightforward to go and find something to fix or make better in the docs repo, and we get a lot of contributions for that too, which is great. So back to the unicorn. Like I said, lots of new docs. So I'm not going to show much, but we're doing a doc of the week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is. And I want to show today change tracker debugging. So let me go here. I've got it open. So this is, again, in our docs page, we've got all of these new documentations, this new documentation for change tracker. This is pretty much everything I know about change tracking here. So go read it and you might understand.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah. But I want to show today change tracker debugging, which is the last item there, because this is super useful information that if you're debugging applications, I think people miss this. So we've talked about this quite a lot on community stand-ups. There's this debug view. So I go, if I'm in Visual Studio or whatever, I can go down into change tracker, the debug view, and then expand here, and I can see this view. And if you go down here in the documentation, we show basically a model and making some changes to it, and then we show what the debug view looks like. So for example, you can see in the short view, it tells us we're tracking each of these entities. So we're tracking 2 blogs, 2 blog assets, a bunch of posts and post tags. These are the join table entries. And it tells you, what their PKs are. If they have alternate keys, it will give you those 2. If they have foreign keys, it will show you the foreign key values. It shows you whether they're modified or unchanged state. So it's basically showing you everything that the change tracker is tracking. There's also a long view that gives you more detail. It basically includes all of the property values. So you can see here we've got this blog and it's modified. And then for the name, this is the property that's been modified, and this was what the original value was. So when you call save changes, this is what's going to be sent to the database. So again, this is super useful for figuring out what's going on. We also show in the long view the contents of navigation properties. So for example, posts here is a collection navigation property, and it currently contains posts with ID 1, 2, and then this one, which has a weird ID because it's a temporary value. There's some documentation on temporary values there. But you can see that if we go down and look at the posts, these correlate up here. So we can see, oh, this is that new post that we're adding. And as we expect, it's in the added state and it has a temporary PK value. So again, this is super useful for figuring out what's in the debug, what's being tracked by the context before you call save changes or while you're making those changes. And then also there's debug logging. So if you switch debug level logging, you'll get all kinds of information about what EF has detected, what properties have changed, what it's doing. So for example, one of my favorite ones is this one here, where it's a cascade state change of entity type post tag with key, and then it gives you the key values. To delete it occurred due to the deletion of its parent entity type post with key value ID 4. So you can say, well, why? If you're trying to figure out why this got deleted, then looking in the logs can really give you a description of why the change tracker made that change, and that could be really useful for figuring out what's going on. So that's our doc of the week. Loads of good docs out there, and that one I think is particularly useful. And I think now we'll go on to the URL list, which I have.
Can I say just one word?
Of course, yeah.
So first of all, in case people haven't followed recently, we've actually done a huge amount of work on our docs in recent weeks. So it's been like a sort of an area of focus. So I really encourage anybody who's not looked at our docs site recently to look. There's tons of new categories there. There's the whole change tracking documentation that Arthur just pointed out to. There's a performance doc thing. Value generation properties have been rewritten. Cascading deletes have been rewritten as well by Arthur recently. So there's been a whole lot of action going on there. Migrations, yeah, there's been a lot of action going on in docs. We've really concentrated on that. So I really encourage everybody to go look at it. We really take our docs very, very seriously. And if you guys think of any areas that need, improvement or anything, please let us know by filing an issue. I also want to, I said this, I think the last time. So the preview 1 that Arthur mentioned, it's important to say, so it's not out yet. It's just starting that process. But once it's out. It's important to realize it's pretty much a stable. So we consider it a very, very stable kind of preview. This is not, your kind of alpha unstable thing which you plug into your application and everything kind of crashes. It goes through the same continuous integration validation. It passes all our tests. So we release previews and indeed even daily builds, which are very, very high quality. So we really, really encourage people to try them out. And if there's some sort of any feature that you saw from what Arthur said that seems like it could be important for you, don't hesitate to try it out with the preview and let us know. This is your way of doing it early enough so that we get feedback. And maybe by the time 6 actually release, we've made it even better. Anyway, that's my speech.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shai. So let's look at the community stand-up links. Do you want to drive this, Jeremy?
Sure thing. So let's click on that first one. SQLite library is a .NET assembly. Now, I haven't done much with this. I don't know if anyone else has looked at it, but apparently it is pulling in that library as just a complete managed assembly that you can pull into a project and use it, which obviously gives it more surface target area and hopefully opens up some new possibilities. Has anyone else looked at this at all?
Yes, I read this, and it's super intriguing to me. There's a lot of things I didn't know here. probably because I've been in the .NET world for so long. I did used to do C++, but a while ago. So basically, it's modern compilers have the ability to generate this bitcode. So rather than generating like x86 machine code or whatever, they can generate this bitcode. I don't know much about this, but the point is that then you can take something that is basically C, compile it with the C compiler, or indeed, I think Eric says that he did it with, he has Rust working and some other languages that can compile to this bitcode as well. So when it does this, we can then take this bitcode and translate it into the bytecode that .NET understands, the IL, intermediate language. And so essentially what you get is a compilation from C into IL, which is super cool, and obviously means that you can run this with no native dependencies on your box, which can be quite beneficial for deployment and all those kinds of things. So this looks super cool. Very much looking forward to seeing more of this.
Yeah, and the first thing I'm going to do is see if there's any way of this translating to a Blazor WebAssembly.
Yes.
SQLite client.
Yes.
Although people have also compiled SQLite directly to WASM. So whether this step works improves that or not, I don't know. But it's an interesting approach, certainly. Perf is obviously the thing that people are probably going to think is the perf going to be the same when you do this or not. So that'll be interesting too. But
sure.
And I also noticed that, of course, this is not the end result. It's not complete yet, but it runs and it passes all the EF Core SQLite
that's
tests.
Right. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yes.
Which is pretty impressive. So it's actually working.
So this is like a fully
100%
yes. managed .NET SQLite. Wow.
Do note on Windows, there's still some issues on Linux, but that's still that's very impressive, because that's basically all of our.
I think that's pretty impressive all the same.
So yeah.
I can try this on my Mac if once we do.
Yeah. Okay, next one.
Yes, this one, very in-depth article on updating schemas without EF Core's migrate feature. So of course we put a lot of work into migrations and we love those, but there are different approaches people take. And one approach is generating scripts, right? And running scripts, which is actually a pretty popular and solid approach. But what this article does is examines different ways of generating the necessary scripts to manage the schema. And I know, Arthur, you took a look at this as well.
Yeah, so basically John is essentially saying, hey, there's a variety of different ways that you can manage your schema. So don't assume initially that migrations won't work. He says he was kind of reluctant to use it, but he's come around to it and thinks that migrations can be a good way to manage this. So that's kind of his option 0. Option 1, we've got Eric here, and that is to use the EF Core Power Tools, because that has a better workflow for keeping your database and your model up to date than we currently have just with the command line tools. This is something we're going to add explicitly to our documentation to point people to this, because I think if you're using Windows and you're doing database first, the Power Tools is currently the way to go. And then John has also written this EF Core Schema Compare library, which basically allows you to do schema diffs using EF Core and generate migration scripts from that. So it's kind of, he's used a lot of the existing code that's in EF Core. It's extensible and publicly accessible. So for example, he's using the existing reverse engineering code APIs and then using the metadata APIs to kind of do the schema compare. And so this is another way that you can keep things up to date without necessarily using either of the migrations or the existing reverse engineering. So some very interesting ideas and approaches there.
I thought it was interesting too. He mentioned he was kind of triggered to write this blog post based on our review of the EF Core 6 survey results. So he noticed that so many people were managing them with scripts that he wanted to address that. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. Okay.
Next one is just our blog post for the EF Core 6 plan, and that is a summarization of what you can find on the pinned issue that Arthur showed earlier.
Mm-hmm. So go look at that, and then there's a more detailed view here. So the blog post is a summary. There's a more detailed view of all of the issues and all of the things we have planned, basically. And then there's a place where you can go, and I don't know if we don't have a link to where you can give feedback, but on the issues page where I showed you, there's a linked issue where you can provide feedback if you want, or you can also comment on the blog post, and that's fine too. So, yep, more feedback is always appreciated there.
And now our next one is this new MSBuild.Sdk that we might need to get a little help from our friend Jonathan to learn more about, but that's the point of this show. So we put those links in there so you can easily access them. But Jonathan, why don't you tell us about this project and what inspired you to pull it together?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on the show, first of all. Yeah, we built this project basically to plug a hole, I would say, in the ecosystem that we thought was worth filling. So if you can share my screen, Arthur, that would be great. So yeah, we already saw the repo here. There's some introduction on why we built this. I've linked a couple of blog posts I did myself on that topic as well. And there's a whole bunch of docs here on how to use it and why we build it. But rather than going through this whole document, I was thinking we might as well just demo it and show you why you should care about this project and why it could be interesting to you. So to do that, I wanted to start out with a little bit of context. So we just talked about entity framework core migrations, which is obviously great if you're starting from scratch and you have nothing at all in terms of a database. It's a great way to start and to build out your database as you go along and develop your code. But sometimes you either have an existing database that you want to bring forward and move forward, or maybe you want to have a little bit more control about what your database actually looks like. So you want to have more control in the raw SQL, basically, and work your way from there. And Visual Studio's had some great tooling, actually, to do that, which has been around, I think, probably since 2010, Visual Studio 2010. I think they called it the Data Dude edition, if I remember correctly.
I remember that.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, that's a long time ago. And it has made some improvements in the meantime. So what I did is I created this blank solution just to get me started. And what you can do actually in Visual Studio right now is you can create what's called a SQL Server Database Project. And then when I add that to my project and to my solution, I get this database too. And from here, I can say add new item. And I can say I want to have like a table, for example. So let me go here. So I'm going to add a table to my project. And I get this designer view with the raw SQL of the actual create script to create that table, right? And I can add additional columns here. So I can choose the data type for that column, and I can check whether I want to allow nulls or not, and all that kind of stuff. So I can basically either visually design it, what my table in this case needs to look like, or I could just write the code myself and edit it from there. So I can also add a column here. Let's call it that, and then something like this, right? So, and then it shows up here as well. And of course, and I can always, I can add other database objects here as well. So I can add a store procedure, for example. Then I get a basic template of what a store procedure could look like, and I can change the parameters, I can change the implementation, all that kind of stuff. And once I'm kind of ready with my database design, I can actually right-click this and say publish. And then I can connect to a database that's running on my local machine or somewhere else, doesn't really matter. And I can click publish, and it will go ahead and deploy the database, and I have this table and this stock procedure in there. And what is going to happen is that it's going to do a build of this project. So let me do that now. And if we're going to look into our bin folder here, you'll notice that we have this thing which is called a DAG pack, which actually refers to Data Tier Application Package, I think it's called. And what this actually is a zip file, and it contains an XML file, which is your model. So it's basically a definition of what you want your database to look like. So it's called a model-first approach. So you just basically say, this is what I want my database to look like. And then you can go to an existing database, for example, and you can tell it to, migrate the existing database to the model that you now want your database to look like. Right? So it's going to do creates or alters or updates or whatever, so that it eventually looks the same as the model that you've defined in your database project. And this has been around for a couple of years now. And this is all nice. But the main problem is that it only works on Windows. So
okay.
Let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to commit this code. This is already hooked up to a GitHub repo, and I'm going to push it. And what you're seeing now is an Azure virtual machine running Windows, but I'm actually on a Mac here. So let me switch over to Visual Studio Code, which is running on my Mac. Let me then fetch that code. And now I have a second database here. And let's do a .NET build, because we want to compile our project. And it's going to fit.
And lots of red.
Yeah, lots of red, right? So we thought that's not a very good experience if you want to build these things on Linux or on Mac. So we set out actually to solve that problem, to make sure that this actually works on Mac as well. And that's where my project basically started. So let's see what that actually looks like in practice. So let me switch back to Visual Studio. Let me remove this project for now from my solution. And then I'm going to open up a PowerShell window in here. And I'm going to say .NET new SQLProj. And this is actually a template that we ship as well as a separate NuGet package. So you can install that with .NET new -install and then MSBuild.Sdk.SqlProj.templates. And it will basically fetch that project template from NuGet, and then then it's available locally.
And you can do that pretty much from any command line interface that has access to .NET, right? It doesn't have to be PowerShell.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it doesn't have to be PowerShell. You can do that in Z Shell on Mac or on Bash on Linux. Or whatever.
Git Bash. That's my go-to.
Oh yeah, you can do that there as well. Any command line will do. So I've already created the project. So let me go ahead and add that back in. And one thing you'll notice is that we now have this CSProj. So it's no longer a SQLProj file. It's now sorry, what's that called? It's now a CSProj file. Let me just get rid of this file. We don't need that anymore. But I still have my SQL files in here, and I can still edit them, and that all still works. And if we look at the project file itself, you'll notice that this is using the new SDK-style projects that were introduced.
Can you zoom that a little bit?
Yeah. Let's go to...
There we go. Much better.
All right.
Yes.
So this is using the SDK-style projects that were introduced with Visual Studio 2017, I think. You'll also notice that in the old project files, you would see all the SQL files that I have listed here included in the project file. So when you add a file, you get a merge conflict on the project file as well, which is a bit annoying. But now we don't have that anymore. and I can actually control what version of SQL Server I'm targeting. So right now I'm targeting SQL Server 2019, but I can change this to SQL 140, and now I'm targeting SQL Server 2017, which is actually what I have on the machine here. So that's good. So let's now do a build again.
So one small question from me. So the thing that powers all this magic is that SDK attribute up there, MSBuild.Sdk, right? This is the thing that brings in all your magic.
Yeah. This is basically what brings in all the magic. Yeah. So this is just a NuGet package that's up on NuGet.org, and you need to specify a version. That's the important part here as well. You can look up on NuGet.org what the latest version is. This is actually the latest version we have available right now. And that pulls in all the magic, and it does all the magic stuff.
Very cool.
Let's open up the bin folder again in debug. Let's ignore this. This is the old output, actually. So let me get rid of that. And in here, we still have that DAC file, right? So that hasn't really changed in that sense. But if I commit this code, and I'm going to push that. And now I'm going to switch over to my Mac here. I'm going to fetch the code. And now let's do another .NET build. And we should now have a DAC file here in the bin folder as well. So you can already see it here in the output. If we look here into the bin folder, we have that database2.dacpack here, which essentially has the exact same contents as that we would have previously. So this actually makes it possible to build these projects in a cross-platform manner. So you can run this on Linux, and you can run this on Mac. You can even run it in Docker containers if you want your build to run in that as well. So that's a great experience for CI/CD as well. And you no longer need Visual Studio on your CI server, for example, which is also a thing to have. But of course, we thought, well, this is cool and this is nice, but I wanted to go a little bit further because, as you saw in my demo just now, I right-clicked the project and said publish, and that would actually publish it to a local database. Wouldn't it be nice if we can do that with this as well? Because that is actually a Visual Studio feature, not a MSBuild feature. So we actually added that support, I think, in 1.2.0. So you can do a .NET publish. Now, if you're on Windows and you have a SQL Server running locally on your local machine, and you can access that with Windows authentication, this is all you need. It's going to just deploy a database with the same name as the project. But since I'm on a Mac and I have SQL Server running in a Linux container on my Mac here, I need to actually specify a username and password because we can't use Windows authentication. So I have to say target user is, I'm going to do sysadmin because why not?
Normally password is password123, right?
Yeah. Well, normally you would say target password and then specify the password here. What I actually did, I made an environment variable called target password, and I put my password in there. And I wasn't even sure when I prepared for this demo if that was going to work, but it works. So that's good. So let's do a .NET publish. And now you're going to see that it's going to deploy the database to my local SQL Server. So it's actually creating the database. It's creating that table and that store procedure. So let me switch over to Azure Data Studio, which I also have here on my Mac. Let's refresh. And you can see that that table is here. If we're going to select some data from that, you can see we have the 3 columns in here. Obviously, there's no data, but you can now put in the data if you want. And there's store procedures here as well. And I can actually run the store procedure if I want. It's not going to do anything interesting, but this just works. And if I now add another object to my database, so let's do, and we have templates for that as well, by the way. So let's go here, let's go to database 2, and let's do .NET new table. Should work. Gonna take. Yeah, well, it's actually, I don't have the templates installed apparently, not on my Mac. So let's install them now. So I'm going to do .NET new install MSBuild.SdK.SqlProj templates. It's going to install the templates onto my machine. And if we look at the templates, you notice that this set of templates is what we ship with out of the box. So we have the project file itself. And then for the most commonly used SQL database objects, so like a view or a table or a procedure or a function or a table valued function, well, all those kind of things are in here.
What's the easiest way of people being able to find what templates you have shipped and discover those? Because you're just typing them into the command line, right? But they're on NuGet somewhere.
Yeah, I think we have docs on that. So let me switch back here. So here's what you need to do to install the templates. So that's up in the README on the repo. And I think we have a list of the templates here as well. Yeah.
Right.
So there's a list of templates here that you can use to create.
And if you do .NET new without any parameters, it'll list all the installed templates too.
Yeah.
So I understand your templates make it possible for me, if I'm using Visual Studio Code or command line or even some alternate IDE, which we know exists out there, to manage the project. But is this the same result as if I was in Visual Studio and just did a right-click add table? Is it pretty much producing the same thing, or are we into a new format now?
No, actually we took the templates that are with the out-of-the-box SQL Server projects. We just took those and put them in here. They're essentially the same. So you get the same end result. One issue with that, though, is that I think that the .NET new templates, or at least the item templates, don't yet show up in Visual Studio if you install them. They recently added a feature to Visual Studio so you can use the templates that you install with .NET New from Visual Studio as well. And they work for project templates, I know, but I don't think they work for item templates just yet. But I believe they're working on it.
So I know there's work going on behind the scenes to make a better template story that integrates with Visual Studio, and it's a fairly large amount of work to create a great experience, but it should continue to get better.
Yeah, I know they're working on it. So, and I think with project templates it already works. Actually, I could show you in a minute, I think. So yeah, that works.
And then do I get the same experience if I am in Visual Studio, even if I created this, let's say a developer on a Linux machine builds up the project, I'm on Windows, I pull it in my Visual Studio. Do I still have the visual designer and all that integrated because it's just looking at it as similar items in the project?
Unfortunately, you don't get that. I can actually show you. If we go to that table here, we just get the SQL file now. We don't get the designer anymore. So that is one of the downsides of this. Personally, I'm more of a just write the SQL, but
sure,
you can understand why people would like this. But that requires some changes to Visual Studio, I think, to actually make that work. So
okay, and then but the conversion from if I use the visual to build the project, and then I convert it to use yours, that's going to be fine. I just lose the visual designer, basically.
Yeah, basically,
yes.
And I think we've seen people use them both. So they have the old SQLProj file in there, and then they have the CSProj file next to it for CI/CD purposes, and then they just edit the SQLProj themselves. That should work as well.
I have a blog post. I have a blog post about how that can be done. So you can build just using .NET, but you still get the consolidation and the compilation, the IntelliSense and all the rest of it from SQLProj, but get the build experience from this project.
Yeah,
nice.
And actually, Eric is one of the contributors to this project as well. So he's been actively sending in PRs and triaging issues. So thanks a lot for that, Eric. That's really great.
So I'm going to ask something that's fairly ignorant. Can you guys, Eric and Jonathan, perhaps together, explain how you use DAC packs to then deploy to SQL Azure or to do diffing databases or other things that you do with DAC packs? Can you give us an overview of how they're useful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I think that basically the publishing support that I just demoed, that's great for local development, right? But you wouldn't want to use that to actually deploy to your test or production environments.
But you still have created a DAC pack using SQL running on your machine, and then I assume then there's a mechanism where you can say, actually, now I want to deploy that to my SQL Azure database and have that schema run there.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a tool called SQL Package.Exe. That's a Microsoft provided tool, and that's it supports
cross-platform. Yes.
Yeah, it's also cross-platform, so that runs on Linux and Mac as well. And you can use that to actually deploy the DAC pack to your target environment, right? So and that has a lot more options and a lot more possibilities than what we have in the project. But they're compatible with each other. So the output you get from this, you then take with SQL package, and that you use that to deploy to production or environment test or whatever. Yeah.
And it's Azure DevOps, for example, has a nicely wrapped task that encapsulates calling SQL package and does some magic with firewalls against the database that you don't have to be concerned about. So it's very easy to use this task to actually deploy the DAC pack without knowing all the intricacies of running a SQL package.
Do you ever run into cases where there's a difference in available features or functionality on SQL Azure where will it tell you could have issues if you put this on Azure because it's not going to behave the same way as your local server?
Yeah, that's part of the SQL Server version. There's also a version for SQL Azure. So this framework knows exactly what SQL syntax is supported by each edition of each SKU of SQL Server.
I see.
Yeah.
So if you try to do something that's not supported on SQL Azure in one of your stored procedures or in one of your views, for example, or use a data type that's not supported on SQL Azure, I can't really think of any at the moment. But if you try to use features that are not available on that platform, you will get build warnings or maybe even build errors.
Yeah. And that's controlled with this SQL Server version attribute here. So you can just change that to SQL Azure and then you target Azure and then you know what's available there. Yeah.
Is there any way to use DAC packs for anything other than SQL Server?
No.
Not that I know of.
No.
So we've removed the limitations here of cross-platform, which is awesome, but it's still only if you are using SQL Server as your database or SQL Azure, obviously.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So obviously we need Shai to get busy writing the MP SQL DAC pack.
Yeah, of course. We'll call it NAC pack.
Exactly.
That sounds like an awful plan, actually.
So when you have this DAC pack in your hands and say, now I actually want to use EF Core, then you can actually generate your EF Core classes and your DB context directly from the DAC pack. I have published a NuGet package that allows you to do that. which makes it a cross-platform functionality. So it's basically a different way of calling DB context scaffold, but it's also a feature of EF Core Power Tools, obviously, that you can instead of pointing to a live database, the source for the database first, it's actually DACPAC first, if you may.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach when you're working on SQL Server in a more database first kind of methodology.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions here. So are there any gaps between what this produces and what the SQLProj produce?
Not any major gaps, I would say. We have a couple of, in the docs, we have a couple of known limitations. That's more about the IDE integration than about the output. I think the output is pretty great.
When I was actually applying this to a system that was already in production, and I was fed up waiting for SQLProj to be built and having this dependency on Visual Studio. So we were using SQL command variables, and there was something else. We were using a couple of features that I helped add to this, and then actually I took the XML file from each of these outputs and compared, and there was no visible, no impactful difference between the two model XML files generated. Keep in mind that this is generated by a Microsoft API, so we're just calling the API in each instance. Visual Studio is calling the API, and this project is calling the API via its tooling. So essentially it should be very high fidelity, and I confirm that it is simply by comparing the two XML files.
Excellent. So fairly common question across all these things. Is there a mechanism for initializing the data in the database? So seeding, essentially.
Yeah, so we do have support for both pre and post deployment scripts. So you can add a script file that is run after the deployment or before the deployment. So you could add your seed data to that if you want. And we even support including different scripts. So you can only have one pre-deployment and one post-deployment script by design, but you can include other scripts from those scripts. So that's how it works.
Excellent. So then you can do your own custom data motion and things like that also in those scripts. So if you're changing the structure of a table, you can save that away and then use it. Excellent.
Just make sure to write some idempotent SQL, but yes.
Yes.
This wouldn't have been a good stand-up if we didn't use the word idempotent. So so I have a question.
Use Sargeable as well. Sargeable is one that I think everybody on the EF team, like, we didn't know what it meant, and then somebody said that's not Sargeable. This was years ago, by the way. We know what it means now for all those people. And then Diego's like, I had to go look what that was up, and so now we use Sargeable whenever we can. But
nice. So I was going to ask, just based on your experience with the project and maybe either issues coming in or people reporting in, what is the common workflow that you see if people are using this with Entity Framework? Are they generating their classes on a frequent basis? Are they using this to manage the database and sort of manually handling the schema? Or what does that 5,000-foot view of end-to-end workflow look like, just at a high level?
Good question. We actually, when we built this project for my company, we didn't actually, we're not using Entity Framework at all. So we're just calling into store procedures using ADO, which has its benefits, but also its drawbacks, obviously. So we don't really have any experience, well, not a lot of experience with Entity Framework. We are looking into that for new projects that are being developed now, but for a lot of the existing code we have, it's all basically based on stored procedures and tables in the database. So,
how about you, Eric? Have you seen?
Yes, I've used it in this workflow in production with a SaaS application I was heading up about a year ago. And what we did was we made the changes in the SQLProj, taking advantage of the immediate validation from IntelliSense and the consistency check of getting things spelled correctly and so on that you get inside this IDE called Visual Studio. And then we basically built the model from the DAC pack using my tools to do that, and committed all that basically together. And so part of our release pipeline was, of course, pushing out the new code that understood the new schema, but at the same time deploying the DAC pack changes, applying the desired state, so to speak, to the production database as part of our pipeline.
Nice.
I think you have some blog posts up on your site, right, Eric? About
I do. I have some blog posts on my blog about this kind of workflow.
Yes, definitely go look at Eric's blog for those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm guessing any database first kind of workflow could use this thing as the part for managing the database, and then possibly something like the Power Tools or any other sort of thing to reverse engineer to an EF Core code model, right? So these are kind of two complementary, very complementary pieces.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm actually using a kind of semi-abandoned Microsoft project that then takes the DAC pack, because it's a quite a complex XML file, and can then reads the DAC pack and turns that into kind of a strongly typed model that you can then iterate, a little bit like the database model that you have in EF Core. So once I had that model running and in place with .NET Core, which was a little bit of a task, because it's a .NET Framework project, but I got it running. So then I actually just could do like a one-to-one translation to the EF Core database model, and that's like the source of the rest of the EF Core-based code generation pipeline, of course. Yeah. So
cool. So then you don't even need to go through that step of reverse engineering from the database. You're going directly from the DAC back into the
that's
code
exactly
model.
that's what we're doing. We don't need, as a developer, it's also a hassle that you have to maybe tear down something you have running even in your local DB and then publish it before you can actually do the reverse engineering. But having a DAC pack file on your file system is very little pain, and then you can just point to that, and it's very a tight loop, and it's very easy workflow to iterate over that and just regenerate the context based on the change you just made and find out if it works for you.
Yeah.
Another question we have is, does it support the Refactor Log? So this is something I haven't heard about for a long time, but I won't say more because I'll probably get it wrong.
Yeah, so we do support adding the Refactor Log to the DAC pack if you have a Refactor Log. But the problem is you need to generate the Refactor Log on the development side of things, and I think that's an IDE feature of Visual Studio.
It is.
So I would say that if you do the buddy project approach that Eric talks about in his blog post as well, I think it would work. So that Refactor Log would get things added over time, and then it would get embedded into the DAC pack, and it would use that during deployment time. So I think that would work. But if you're just editing it in Visual Studio without the SQLProj, it's not gonna stand the refactor. Yeah.
Yes. I see somebody's asking about the DAC pack reverse engineering code that I mentioned. It's available. That feature is available both as a NuGet package, and it's built into EF Core Power Tools. It's exact same library, and that of course is available as open source on GitHub, so you can inspect it and play with it there.
And that was actually going to be a question of mine from a little bit of a different angle. So this is an open source project. What does your issue backlog look like? Are you looking for contributors to help out with the project? Are you in pretty steady state now? What's the story?
Well, we could definitely use some help if anybody's interested. That's always welcome. I'm pretty on top of things at the moment, but yeah, there's always things we would like to do, but just don't have time to do it. So one thing that's actually been asked a couple of times is support for SQL CLR, and that's not something we have currently. I'm not even sure if you want to add it, but there's definitely been some ask about it. So we might have to figure out if we can do that or not. So.
Question for you and Eric on that: do you see people using SQL CLR a lot in your work?
Well, not in my work directly, but we do get a lot of ask for it
Really?
on the GitHub repo. I always try to kind of push people away from it, but I think people are still using it. So yeah.
I mean, there's so it's not. Go ahead, Eric. Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I see it also people having all kinds of put themselves in a really bad corner by using SQL CLR, and no offense to the SQL team or anything, but I think it's something that's ripe for abuse, and I think if you can avoid it, by all means do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on a project that used SQL Core or SQL CLR, and it had to do. This was a old project years ago, and we had some pretty complex hierarchies and data relationships that we needed some logic to figure out some of those relationships before we actually materialized the join. And for us, managing that CLR component every time we updated, refreshed, deployed to a new environment was just so challenging that we eventually ended up figuring out how to write some functions to do the same thing and roll it out that way.
There is there's overlap between features that people need in SQL CLR where they're not really using SQL CLR, but they need things like hierarchy ID or the spatial types that are kind of implemented using that same mechanism. So sometimes we see requests for SQL CLR because of those things, but yeah, these days we rarely see people doing complex things in SQL CLR.
Yeah. I actually had one more thing to show, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let me go back to Visual Studio here. So sometimes you might want to split up your database project into separate projects so you can more easily manage them while they still deploy to the same database or even different databases, perhaps. And obviously, that could be done with SQL Server projects by referencing another DAG pack, basically. But well, in the .NET world, we already have NuGet packages to manage the complexities of dependencies, right? So we added support for adding package references to your project as well.
Cool.
Nice.
What I did is I created this base project here, which just has a table in it. And I've used, and it uses the same project. So let me zoom in here real quick. So this is also just a SQLProj basically, and you can do .NET pack on this. So I can do .NET pack, and say I want this to my local temporary NuGet packages folder. I'm just going to create a NuGet package on my local machine. And I will need to set the version right. Package version is 101. And once I have that in place, I can go to my project I just had. And I can say manage NuGet packages. I can browse my local feed, install it. And now we have a package reference here to that base project. And if we now go to do a .NET publish, I see. Still have the SQL profile here. I think we should be able to do this. You'll notice here that we've added a reference to that project or to that backpack file. And we can actually now use that table from a procedure that we've defined here. So if I edit this store procedure here and say, I want to select some data from that other table that's in the other project, and we're going to go ahead and build this. We're going to see that it's going to compile just fine. Because that, even though that table isn't defined here, right? So it's defined in another project, and we just reference it.
Cool.
And where was that when I was consulting? Being able to manage complex database dependencies with NuGet.
Yeah, I don't know where that was. It's a good question.
Wow, I just think of the ways because I was pre-DACPack, and I remember using a SQL, what is it called, management. So the interface to SQL through the .NET framework where you can inspect and generate the scripts. But I remember manually creating all of these scripts for tracking schema changes and applying incrementally, and it's just amazing how far database management has come. So it's great. Yeah. And it's awesome to see community building these tools to make it available cross-platform.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and we're actively using it ourselves, so that's good, but we also see a lot of other people using it. We have about 40K downloads on NuGet.org right about now, I think. So it's only a year old, and it's been going pretty well, so I'm happy with that.
So I'd be interested for those watching, if this is the first time you've been exposed to the project, or if you think it is going to prompt you to take a serious look now, drop something in the comments. It'd be great to hear from you, just out of curiosity.
Cool. Any more questions?
I think we're almost out of our scheduled time here.
All right.
Is there anything else, Jeremy, we need to cover?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Should we end there then?
We shall end there, and thanks everyone for joining us. We always appreciate your time and your attention. This will be this has been recorded. It'll be posted up at the live site, and we'll be doing these every 2 weeks. And thank you for our guest Jonathan and our community co-host Eric. We appreciate you coming on.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye-bye.